I'm Julie Bulitt. I've been a family therapist for over 30 years.
I'm David Bulitt. I've been a divorce and family lawyer for more than 35 years.
Together, we have been married for more than 37 years.
In our professional practices, the two of us have been witnesses to individuals and families struggling with life's most difficult challenges. In this podcast, we will talk about the conversations we have had,
The conversations we should have had.
and those that every relationship needs to have in order to find success, happiness, and fulfillment.
This is Conversations for Couples.
The podcast. Welcome back to Conversations for Couples.
The podcast.
I am here today, sandwiched between two mental health professionals, the one that I am married to, and someone often called the relationship whisperer, Jonathan Van Viegen, who's coming to us directly from Panama City. John has an interesting practice. He has a no-nonsense approach that helps couples get straight to what works, helping them feel chosen and cherished again. I love that. Mm-hmm. He likes to skip the therapy jargon and get right to the root of the problem. So I'm very anxious because to see what my wife has to say about certain ways in which you attack problems and issues with couples. And so let's dig right into it. And my first question comes from a recent post of yours, and that is that you indicated that fighting over text can be good for relationships, which I would have thought the opposite. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts in that regard.
I mean, it really, so as a couples therapist, and I've specialized now, and I almost work exclusively with couples. I mean, I have some individuals from time to time. The thing that we are always challenged in our field is emotion. We're challenged with over emotionality, and the problem with that is that when couples get to a state of being flooded, what happens is their executive functioning shuts down. They stop being problem-solving, creative, imaginative beings, and they go into this fight, flight, freeze response. And no one can be self-reflective, and no one can be curious when they're that those emotions are just flooding. And the reason why I like text messaging is because it gives you the opportunity to hit pause, and you actually you get that visual cue of what you're communicating to your partner. Now, I'm not saying it's a silver bullet, and I'm not saying that everyone needs to do it, but what I was trying to do with that post is normalize communication in 2025 to say, it's actually not a terrible thing if you want to, hash things out over text. Right.
Yeah, but there is so much room for, miscommunication around text, and tone.
For sure.
Tone. So, yeah,
For sure.
I find that's difficult. But yes, I understand exactly what you mean when people are fighting and they get triggered and their whole executive functioning sort of shuts down. It is hard. One of the things that, I see in my office and we see together and working with couples is that's what you need to be able to work on is figuring out your triggers, right? Your own triggers and your partner's triggers, and then being able to fight differently, right? Being able to not go into a flooded way. How do you help your clients do that?
Well, I guess I don't believe in helping people figure out their triggers, and I think that's why my approach is quite different. The reality is that if we theoretically could figure out our triggers for our fights and our arguments and the negative things, what stops us from figuring out our triggers for all the amazing parts of our relationship? And see, the reality is that most people get stuck in this problem-focused view of their relationship. They only see what they don't want. And so if I ask couples, walk me through your ideal relationship, they'll describe to me the absence of the pain. He won't be on his phone all the time. She won't nag. He won't, drink so much. She won't accept DM requests from people, right? So they'll describe the perfect relationship based on the absence of the pain or the problem, right? But that's like exhaling carbon dioxide. Like we need to exhale carbon dioxide, but that doesn't give you life. You still need to breathe in oxygen. right? And so what I find typically with couples is that they're so hyper focused on what they don't want, they stop being focused on what they do want. And so then the challenge is that when they start getting what they do want, it gets glossed over, it's oversimplified, or perhaps it's not even noticed. Something I often say to couples is, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to see it, did it make a sound? Right?
Right.
So we don't need to focus on our triggers of what's not working in our relationship. That muscle is so over-exercised and so overused. It's focusing on what we want and how our partner's showing up and meeting our expectations. That's the muscle that's atrophied. So that's kind of my approach, I guess. Probably
So let's move this into from philosophy into how it would work. We're in your office virtually or otherwise, and we sit down and talk about all of the things that are wrong, the problems that we're having. Julie doesn't do this. She doesn't do that. I wish she would do this. We should have sex more often. We should save money better. We should do X, Y, and Z. Julie rattles off her complaints and so forth. At what point do you jump in and say, hold on a second, we're going to look at things a different way if you do that? Or how do you handle that couple who just really comes to you and wants to vent and looks to you to make things better?
Oftentimes that negative energy's got to come out. I mean, I just had a session with a couple as the very first session I had with them. And that stuff just needs to come out. And then eventually they exhaust themselves. It's kind of like a temper tantrum with a child, like a toddler. Eventually the negativity, runs dry. And then I chime in and I can say, hey, can we get building what we want to build? Like, I'll give you an example. One of my proudest moments, I was still a clinical intern at the time, was when, a couple came to me and said that there'd been profound trust issues that had happened in their relationship. And fast forward 10 sessions later, when they finished with me and they said, Jonathan, thank you so much. I still, after that 10th session, had no idea what happened that caused the trust issue. See, I don't need to know the pain because that's the rear view mirror, right? So in the practice, I would say, you mentioned intimacy. We need to have sex more. So basically you're asking, how do we cultivate more physical connection, right? So then I would go to my 3 favorite questions, which would be, over the course of the last week, when did you have a close physical connection? And that's a past-oriented question. Then I would move into a present-oriented question where I'd get them brainstorming and I'd say, tell me, let's come up with some ideas of how you would cultivate a close physical connection. And then I would future orient them and I would say, let's suppose you guys were fully connected in every way that you wanted to be. What would be taking place in your relationship that told you that? And so those 3, I've used memory, I've used creativity, and I've used imagination, which are also higher faculties, to get them moving in the direction that they want to go. Now they'll only go in that direction if they're feeling good. But if I ask them, why aren't you connected? Why won't she have sex? That's when people shut down. So,
So from what I'm understanding, when we were talking about trying to figure out triggers and you're saying, all that doesn't really matter, like the going back and replaying your childhood and how it's impacting the relationship now. So are you abandoning some of your training as a psychotherapist in some way by not paying attention to that?
Yeah, no, I definitely call it out. Like I actually literally just did a post yesterday on the ridiculousness of attachment theory. And so
we're going to ask you about that.
Yeah, it's a great topic. Like, I think one of the things that people fail to see, first of all, attachment theory was rooted in, looking at children and mothers and babies. It wasn't really meant for complex adult relationships. The second is, well, the other 2 big, kind of red flags of attachment, trying to diagnose attachment styles, for example, is therapists need to understand, and our clients need to understand, when our clients are coming to us, they're giving us half the story. You don't go to a doctor and tell them how great your body feels. Right? So you go to a therapist and you talk about all the symptomology and all the pathology in your relationship. And so now I'm making a diagnosis based on half the information, right? So of course you could paint any picture of attachment, avoidance, anxiety, anything, right? And so, but the therapist making the diagnosis or the assessment is going to be doing that based on, half of the truth, right?
Well, without calling labels, sorry to interrupt, whether it's this attachment style or the other, isn't the symptomology what you're saying, I think, is that the symptomology, what they're experiencing and what they're conveying to you is really the important part for you in terms of working with this person or these folks, regardless of what a quote attachment style someone has.
Yeah, but I'm also being very pragmatic. Like to sort out why someone feels anxiously attached in their relationship would take hundreds of hours of, and we need to really sort through what happened in those moments. Like I can point to someone feeling anxious, a woman, for example. I get probably about 5 DMs a month from women in their, late 20s, early 30s, living with a guy and feeling a ton of trust issues, right? And I'm always asking, are you guys engaged? Is this moving along the continuum of seriousness in your relationship? And she'll say, oh, we talk about it and I really want to, but it's been 4 years and he hasn't proposed yet, right? So are her trust issues based on the fact that she comes in with some disoriented attachment style, or is it because she's with a guy who's taking 4 years of her prime life and he's not committing to her, and now also he's texting with other coworkers at 9:00 at night, right? So where is the attachment style? And this is the other challenge too with attachment theory, is particularly as it relates to attachment styles. I graduated summa cum laude, which I graduated #1 in my class. How do you know the therapist that you're actually with didn't get a C? Because I saw some of my the people that I graduated with, and they had very poor marks. They would argue that certain theoretic models in our field of marriage and family therapy were actually systemic when they're not, right? So you don't even know who you're with. You don't even know if you're getting good advice, and so you're going to attach your self identity, hang that on the hook of some therapist that may not have, that barely scraped by. I just think that there's dangers in it.
Well, I
graduated magna cum laude, so I'm just behind you. But I always tell.
I, on the other hand, was about a 3.2, and it was a lucky 3.2.
I always tell clients, anybody that's coming to either work with David and I for coaching or me for therapy, is you need to interview the person that you need to interview them like they're doing a job. Like can they help you? Do you feel comfortable? I don't care if you went to Harvard. I don't care what your training is. If you don't feel comfortable with a therapist, it's not going to work. Yeah. But I will say to you that I understand what you're saying in terms of the attachment, but sometimes it's very, very clear, and it doesn't necessarily take 100 sessions to understand where somebody's coming from. And I'll give you an example of a couple that I was working with recently. And he was having a lot of, I would call, anxious attachment with his wife. And we talked about his background, and he, had kind of a crappy, family history. He was very close with his grandmother, and she was the one that sort of took care of him. And he described a scene where the grandmother was at a neighbor's house watering some plants, and she didn't come back. And he talked about being 8 years old and going into the house and finding that his grandmother had a heart attack and died. Okay, so at 8 years old, he was, first of all, traumatically, seeing his grandmother die on the floor, but then really feeling alone because his parents were not parenting him. His grandmother was parenting him. So that, to me, was very clear and helped his wife understand that he needed more. He needed more touch. He needed more reassurance. He needed more connection maybe than she did. And that was very clear in just a couple sessions getting a background. What what would you say about that?
I mean, the way I prefer to work is to just work without the diagnoses and the labels. Right. So that could very well be true. Basically, what you're talking about is he's coming in with a ton of symptomology, and he's asking her to understand the symptomology, right? I think we can have those conversations, and I think we will have those conversations. I just think that we don't need to attach a label or a diagnosis to it, right? I skip that step because I know that, like, it's, one of my biggest critiques of, say, 12-step programs. Like, you've got to identify as the addict first before you can identify as anything else. And I just have trouble with that. I know they work for a lot of people, but just in my worldview, when I see a homeless guy on the street, I don't think schizophrenic. I don't label him schizophrenic first, right? My first thought is he's kind man, nice, wonderful. I see him picking up garbage. He cares about his community, that type of thing, right? So it's really all just what you choose to see. And, even if I was in a relationship where one of us was insecure or anxious or anything, I'm just not going to choose to see that when I reference, build that image in my mind of my spouse or my partner, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just think it attaches us to things we don't want to be attached to.
It attaches you, yeah. We'll let the pun pass. Let me switch for a second, a little bit to a different topic, because this struck me timing-wise. I knew we were going to see you today, and I mediated a case the other day where, and what I do as a lawyer mediator, obviously my job is to try to get folks to resolve whatever issues exist between them, to get them from married world to divorced land, because that's why they're there.
Yeah.
But generally what I do, I let folks know, I'm not here to be your therapist, but on the other hand, people do need to talk, and they do need to vent a little bit about how they got there. And this came up yesterday, and or day before yesterday, and I saw this in a post of yours. And this woman said to me, I know you're not supposed to hear all of this, but I just want you to understand, he never asked me how my day was. He never asked me, what I did or what I wanted to do. It was like, I think she said it was like his job and our taking care of the kids and our growing older, but there was no curiosity from him. And then soon on the heels of that, as I'm going through some of your posts, I see you talking about curiosity. And that really, it struck me. So tell me a little bit from your perspective, the importance of curiosity in a relationship.
It's really timely because this couple I just wrapped up with 20 minutes ago before we got started. So basically, as I was talking about the carbon dioxide that couples don't want, that's all the crap that they, the disorganized attachment, the anxious, the phone, the lack of sex, all that stuff. People build this worldview of all that they don't want, and they steep themselves in the pain of what they don't like about the relationship. And what happens is that shuts off your curiosity. It destroys it. It completely blunts it. Same as self-reflection. So, see, I see self-reflection and curiosity as two sides of the same coin. And so what happens is that they get so blunted when they look at their relationship and what they don't love about it, they lose the ability to be self-reflective and understand how they may have played a part in getting all the stuff they don't want. And then on the flip side, they lose the curiosity for how they get what they do want. They stop asking questions, right?
Yeah. So just a quick question about that. I know you've worked with a lot of couples, and I'm sure you've seen that some people don't have the ability or much of curiosity or self-reflection. Maybe there's some neurodiversity, whatever we want to call it. I'm not labeling. But what do you do with couples that it's not a turned off or just became, in a bad pattern, but really have a difficult time perspective taking, a difficult time being self-reflective? How do you deal with that with your couples that you're working with?
On a very pragmatic, practical sense, you got to go back to find what moves them closer together on the couch versus what moves them further away. So like every couples therapist knows this, that if I ask a couple a certain set of questions, I can get them more upset with each other and physically moving apart, or I could ask them a ton of questions that move them together, right? Now, I've never needed to pay my bills. I've never worried about that. There was always a good stream of couples. I wanted them to move closer. For a couple like that have lost the ability, basically what you're describing is a couple that has lost the ability to keep their partner top of mind. But the reality is, if you take them back to the early days in their relationship, like I would take my wife out for sushi. I would literally listen to every single word that came out of her mouth. Like I couldn't get enough of her. So then you got to go back to maybe it's the early stages of that relationship and see what was taking place back then that you could literally not get enough of this person in front of you. And that moves them closer to each other on the couch, right?
And I think that applies both from a curiosity perspective, from an interest perspective, but also from an intimacy perspective. I mean,
Right.
you know, we were out to dinner with friends of ours some time ago, and there was a couple at another table that were very affectionate with each other. And I've told this story before. And one of the folks that we were with said, "Oh, they must not have been together very long." And that struck me. And I said to myself,
maybe she said maybe they're definitely not married.
definitely not married or not
like
together, whatever it was. But that was the general theme of it.
Yeah.
And that struck me. And I said to myself, well, why does that have to be, or why should it?
Sad.
It's sad. And we do talk to folks, and when we work with people about trying to remember, sorry about the barking, we try to talk to them about how did you feel then, and how can you recapture that feeling now?
Yeah.
You really want to get to a place where, so like with my wife, and this is what I teach professionally too. I believe there's 2 vows that every couple should make. And if I would tell all of your listeners to do these 2 vows, I would dust them off the shelf right away and recommit. And those 2 vows are, I endeavor every single day to hold your emotional well-being ahead of my own. And I endeavor to show up today better in our relationship than I did yesterday. And when you make those vows to your partner, what you're saying is that I am attaching myself to you because you're tetherable to me. I want to tether myself to you, ultimately, is what you're saying, right? You're saying that I choose you and I cherish you, because those 2 vows send that all important message that, you know, I can't live without you, and I don't intend on living without you. And that's what everyone wants to know. And I came across that word, I kind of made it up, but I believe every single adult, whether you're, 25 or you're 55 or 75, I think ultimately all of us want to know that we're tetherable, that we're the type of person that our partner would want to tether themselves to for the rest of their life.
I think
so that's what
that's a really simple, but I think effective and meaningful way of explaining it. I think that people do want to feel that they're tethered, connected, that connection is not fraying. You're probably not a Bruce Springsteen fan, but he wrote a song. Okay, so he wrote a song called "The Ties That Bind," and it's sort of the same kind of a thing. It's how are we tied together, and how are we bound together, and how do we maintain that binding, right? Without it fraying.
Yeah, and then just in a healthy relationship thought, which is that you need to be tethered, but then you need to be able to go away and know that it's okay and that you will come back, right? The healthy boundaries and relationships and other things that go on.
Yeah, I don't work in that realm of say privacy, boundaries, independence. Those aren't the muscles I flex, just because I think automatically people have self-interest that they flex those muscles. But I'm always, the way I kind of describe it, have you ever gone to like maybe the trails or the waterfront or the mountain where you live, and you ran into that couple that were like 65, and they clearly had gone out and bought the same ski jackets. He got his version, she got hers version, and they're the same model but just slightly different colors, or it's the bikes, or maybe it's the running shoes. It's those couples that do things together that strengthen that, what I call sameness. Those are the ones that are holding hands at 70. It's the couples that wake up and decide, hey, why don't we start a podcast together and let's do something together, right? Those are the couples that because they're on a shared journey in life, right? So to me, I'm always cultivating sameness.
That's very interesting.
Yes.
And I know exactly what you're thinking. I think I know what you're thinking. We spoke with a couple from India a few months back.
Yeah.
And they dress alike every day. So whoever gets up first picks out what they're going to wear, and whoever gets up after that has to sort of find a way. And from the outside looking in, it seems a little wacky. It's like you're dressing your twins for school, but in fact, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's a connector, and I'm quite certain those 2 people will be holding hands well into their 70s and beyond.
If I can add to that, I have a lot of faith, and so for me, I turn to the Bible, and in the Bible it says 2 become one flesh. And I don't care if people have faith or not, but I think I turn to that part of the scripture because I really believe that it's a guidebook. When two share an identity and when they work together and they see each other as one unit, that is what keeps people together. Because I've never seen two people work on something and get so excited about something that didn't feel like they were in a partnership, whether it was starting a podcast, a business, whatever it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for, David and I working together, we sort of raised our kids, and then this came, right? Like we were able to then start to work together. We wrote 2 books, we do the podcast, so it is definitely, binding us together. So I'm curious, and I could get in trouble for asking this because it may not be where David wanted to go, but how do you practice some of these things in your own relationship?
For me, I'm proud that I don't have the defensive gene. Like, I grew up in a very traumatic home, and conflict was really normal, and so we just got used to not being defensive. So that really helped me in my marriage, so that I sprinkle a healthy dose of self-reflection, and I think what happens is that for both my wife and I, and this is what I tell couples all the time, I think most conflict, the deepest, the most painful conflict comes from this place of where someone's internalized what the other person has said or done, and they've internalized it as part of their identity. So I believe that all couples, every adult on the planet, can be thoughtless, lazy, or insensitive, usually multiple times a day, right?
Yes.
But what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to look at our partner and say, that's just your behavior. I still love who you are. So we need to separate behavior from identity. And my wife and I do a really good job at that. So I think when you've done that really well, like she and I have arguments. We had a really tough argument over the weekend, which would have been the first one in like a year. But we have smaller arguments that last maybe 10, 15 minutes. But for for us, a tough argument was like 2 hours. Right. So what happens is, I think when you're not internalizing it as part of your identity, as in you're not a bad person, because I think ultimately that's what we all want. That's the message we want to hear. I'm a good man. I'm a good woman. When that's not up for debate, and I can just be annoyed or frustrated with your behavior, you can really keep it, at arm's length, and it doesn't need to sting as much. So.
Yeah. And we talk about that sort of like healthy conflict piece, which is the ability to, disagree and have arguments and differences, but not feel like it's a threat to the relationship or the self.
Yeah.
So that's great. And how long have you been married?
15 years. It'll be 16 years.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. In June. So.
That's great.
So Jonathan, I have a last question for you. And I'd love to ask therapists these types of questions. A couple comes to you, they're just getting started, they just got married, or they're getting ready to get married, and they want a soundbite, one piece of advice. What would you tell them as they embark on their hopefully lifelong relationship together?
I say protect your physical connection at all costs, because it's going to be the litmus test. It's going to be the smell test for your relationship. So if the hugs, the kissing, the sex starts to decline, you got to course correcting quickly. Because I believe that your physical intimacy is the manifestation of your emotional connection. So it's why I give couples my intimacy dashboard, which I created.
Yes.
Love it.
Yes.
Love it. And folks, if you want to connect with Jonathan, his Instagram handle, I guess that's what we call it, as a handle. Instagram name will be in the show notes. Jonathan, this has been great. For me, I'm used to speaking to one therapist every day. Talking to two sometimes gets a little bit of an overload, but it's really been wonderful having you.
And I love and respect your differences in the traditional therapist mode and how you have very different ideas, which I love. And I could talk with you probably for more hours around those.
Definitely.
But it's been great to have you on. We wish you the best in your own relationship and helping all of those that you do.
Thank you so much. And folks, we are the Bulitts, TheBullitts. You can find us on all social media platforms at the Bulitts. And come on back next time. This is Conversations for Couples,
the podcast.
Julie Bulitt is a professionally licensed clinical social worker and family therapist. David Bulitt is a divorce and family lawyer. Julie is not your therapist, and David is not your lawyer. This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only.